When the spirit leads and the flesh resists, the war for your soul. There are hours when the surface of your life looks calm, when the world thinks you are fine, productive and composed, yet inside you feel a pressure that cannot be named. It is the pulse of two forces contending for the throne of your heart. One is quiet, steady, and luminous, the spirit who leads you toward truth, courage, integrity, and obedience. The other is immediate, loud and persuasive, the flesh, the bundle of reflexes and appetites that fears surrender and demands its own way. Between these two arises the war for your soul, a struggle that does not fade with time or success, but deepens as you draw nearer to what you were created to be. To be alive to God is to be drafted into this conflict. To be called is to be pursued, and to be pursued is to be refined in a furnace where excuses burn off and your deepest loyalties are revealed. You sense this war when you delay the good you already know to do, when you negotiate with compromise in the dark and then wear a mask in the light, when you taste the first sweetness of obedience and then recoil at what it may cost you. The flesh promises you quick relief, manageable risks, controllable outcomes, the illusion that you can keep your idols and also have peace. The spirit does not bargain. He calls you to die before you die, to renounce mastery so you can finally live under a better king. This is why the Spirit's whisper can feel severe, because he speaks to the parts of you that must end so the true you can begin. The battleground is not merely your habits or your calendar or your stated beliefs. The battleground is your imagination, your attention, your affections, the internal hierarchy of what you love most. What you consistently contemplate, you will eventually imitate. What you protect in secret will shape you in public. No one wins the war for the soul with willpower alone. You do not out-argue the flesh any more than you can outswim a riptide. You must turn and be pulled by a greater current. The Spirit does not merely supply ideas, he supplies power, presence, and a new center of gravity in you. He does not beckon you into a moral improvement project. He invites you into union with a person whose very life unmakes the tyranny of your cravings. Yet the flesh resists. It mistrusts surrender the way a wounded animal mistrusts help. It remembers every humiliation, every prayer that felt unanswered, every season when obedience looked like loss. It tells you that holiness is sterility, that discipline is the death of joy, that trust is naivete. It says, if you let go, you will be dropped. The Spirit answers, if you let go, you will be carried. And so you stand between two voices. The one you feed becomes the loudest, the one you follow becomes your future. The question is not whether a war exists, but whether you will finally call it what it is and fight with the weapons that are given to you. Truth, surrender, daily repentance, watchfulness over your mind, fellowship with the wise, and a vision of God that makes lesser pleasures look as small as they truly are. What follows in these 5 long movements is not a theory, but a map of lived battle. How to recognize the flesh when it disguises itself as wisdom. How to hear the Spirit when he leads in inconvenient directions. How to develop practices that thicken your soul against old temptations. How to transform failure into intimacy rather than shame. And how to persevere when the war grows subtle, long, and holy. This is not a sprint of resolutions, but a pilgrimage of reorientations. You are not failing because you are fighting because you are finally alive. If you are weary, take heart. The Spirit who began the work is the same Spirit who sustains it, and the victory that seems far away has already started within you in ways you can scarcely perceive. Your task is not to fabricate light, but to remove whatever blocks it. Your task is not to conquer in your own strength, but to consent to be conquered by love. Naming the war. So the war can change. The flesh wins by confusion. If it can keep you from recognizing a battle as a battle, It can make defeat feel inevitable and obedience feel extreme. So the first work of the Spirit is clarity, to convince you of truth, to name what is actually happening beneath your habits and reactions. Many people exhaust themselves treating symptoms while the disease remains unnamed. They label recurring sin as stress, call avoidance discernment, rename envy as concern, and baptize apathy as contentment. The flesh thrives on euphemisms. The Spirit speaks plainly. When you finally call your compromise sin, not nuance, when you admit that your distraction is not accidental but chosen, when you confess that your resentment is not protection but a prison, you have already shifted the terrain. Naming is not condemnation, it is liberation. Only what is named can be surrendered. Only what is surrendered can be transformed. But naming the war requires a certain courage. It asks you to stand in front of the mirror without makeup or lighting tricks and allow the real state of your heart to be revealed. It asks you to keep a truthful journal rather than a curated one, to let mature voices ask you questions you cannot easily spin, to read the words that unsettle you instead of only the ones that flatter you. The flesh tells you that awareness will crush you. The Spirit promises that awareness will cleanse you. The difference between shame and conviction is not in the wound, but in the surgeon. Shame exposes to humiliate. Conviction exposes to heal. Shame points at your failure and says, "This is who you are." Conviction points at your failure and says, "This is what you are not." To name the war, you must also unmask the strategies of your flesh. It will not always entice you to obvious wrong. Often it will offer you a lesser good to avoid a greater obedience. It will distract you with busyness so you cannot be available to God. It will keep you helpful so you never have to be honest. It will offer you theology without intimacy, service without surrender, achievement without heart. The flesh is not creative, it is adaptive. It learns your patterns, your triggers, your carnal liturgies, those repeated sequences of thought and behavior that lead you to the same place of numbness. Your phone at midnight is a liturgy. Your bitterness rehearsal on the drive home is a liturgy. Your morning rush without prayer is a liturgy. The flesh catechizes you with repetition until what once felt optional now feels inevitable. The Spirit interrupts these grooves with counter-liturgies. A psalm in the morning instead of a scroll. A 5-minute exam in the car instead of an outrage podcast. A single honest confession to a trusted friend instead of another week of smiling silence. You do not stumble into holiness. You practice it into second nature under grace. There is a quiet crisis that accompanies every season of potential growth. The moment you realize that the cost of following the Spirit will not be paid by your future, ideal self, but by the current, tired, real one. The flesh always defers obedience. Later, when the schedule changes. Later, when the kids are older. Later, when you feel more spiritual. Later, when the circumstances are fair. The Spirit says, today. Not because God is impatient, but because delay is how the heart forgets what freedom feels like. Every later the flesh wins becomes a habit of postponement, a scaffolding around your soul that keeps you from acts of courage that must be done while your hands still shake. If you wait to obey until you feel bold, you will wait forever. Boldness is the fruit of obedience, not the prerequisite. Naming the war also means discernment about voices. Some voices inside you sound like you, others sound like wounds you still carry. Still others sound like cultural scripts you never chose but quietly absorbed. The Spirit's voice is not the loudest, but it is the clearest. It carries a gravity toward humility, charity, and truth. It urges you to reconcile rather than retaliate, to bless rather than broadcast, to endure rather than escape. The flesh's voice promises relief without reconciliation, victory without virtue, influence without intercession. It tells you that your anger is prophetic when it is often just personal. It says your cynicism is discernment when it is commonly fatigue. It insists that your calling must always be big when it may simply need to be faithful. To sort these voices, you must slow down enough to listen. Hurry is the camouflage of the flesh. Silence is the sanctuary of the spirit. Let us be specific. Consider the moment you are tempted to shade the truth to look better, to hold back part of the story so your image remains intact. The flesh argues, this is small, harmless, practical. The spirit whispers, a small lie trains you for a larger one, and your soul cannot bear the weight of duplicity. If you name this as war, you will not negotiate. You will pause, breathe, tell the whole truth, and accept whatever discomfort follows as the price of being clean inside. Or consider anger. The flesh delights in the quick energy that anger brings. It feels like power, like clarity. The Spirit will not let you baptize hostility as righteousness. He will ask you to step away before you speak, to pray for the person you want to destroy, to put your words under the governance of love. If you name this as war, you will not vent. You will crucify the thrill of being right to resurrect the deeper joy of being reconciled. Or consider lust. The flesh whispers that fantasy is safer than relationship, that secret indulgence hurts no one. The Spirit insists that every indulgence trains your heart in either fidelity or fracture, that what you do when no one sees becomes the shape of your love when everyone does. If you name this as war, you will not flirt with the edge. You will change the path, move the device, tell the truth, and cultivate a vision of beauty that includes holiness. The flesh is not merely personal, it is social. It uses the gravity of your environment, the architecture of your routines, the expectations of your circles. You do not fight the war for your soul as an isolated hero, but as a member of a community that either strengthens your defenses or undermines them. The people you admire quietly authorize your choices. If those you esteem are ironic, detached, and perpetually unimpressed, you will become a connoisseur of distance. If those you esteem are humble, joyful, and serious about obedience, you will find your courage grows simply by their nearness. The Spirit places you into such company not by accident but by design. He gives you brothers and sisters whose stories become road signs, whose prayers become scaffolding when your resolve shakes. Name this as war too. Isolation is not freedom, it is exposure. Accountability is not intrusion, it is armor. When you begin to name the war, you will encounter a paradox. You will feel simultaneously weaker and safer. Weaker because illusions are gone, and you can no longer pretend that you are doing better than you are. Safer because truth ushers in grace, and grace begins to operate not on the person you wish you were, but on the person you actually are. This is why you must resist the perfectionism that keeps repentant people from progress. The Spirit does not scold you for learning to walk. He is the Father who delights to see you try again, steadier this time, less afraid of falling, because falling is no longer final. The flesh wants you to measure your worth by your last failure. The Spirit wants you to measure your hope by God's last promise. The flesh points to your track record. The Spirit points to your trajectory. The flesh demands proofs. The Spirit trains patience. The flesh is fascinated with optics. The Spirit is faithful with essence. There is an art to staying with the Spirit when the flesh resists in subtler forms. Sometimes the resistance will not be a loud temptation, but a slow erosion, a gradual cooling of your affections, a bored familiarity with sacred things, a professional posture toward the life of the heart. The remedy here is not louder music or busier schedules, but a return to first love, remembering in detail how God found you, what He delivered you from, how He spoke to you when you were lonely, how He answered the prayer you did not know how to articulate. Remembering is gasoline on the altar. Gratitude melts the calcification around your soul. When you recall mercy, Obedience becomes response rather than obligation. Holiness becomes gratitude embodied. The Spirit loves to kindle joy where the flesh has made everything heavy. He turns duty into delight, not by diluting the call, but by enlarging your vision of the caller. Perhaps the most decisive moment in naming the war is this: choosing in advance how you will answer when God's lead contradicts your preference. If your obedience requires understanding first, you will rarely obey, because God's wisdom often outruns your categories. If your obedience requires convenience, you will serve as long as serving does not cost you your favorite comforts. If your obedience requires applause, you will shrink from the quiet sacrifices that only the Father sees. The Spirit trains you to pre-decide. When God's word and my preference collide, I have already chosen my allegiance. This is not bravado. It is the sober decision of a soul that has learned where life actually is. The flesh negotiates, the Spirit consecrates. Consecration is not a dramatic moment on a stage. It is the daily, untelevised choice to move with God rather than with mood. It is making your yes small and near, this room, this conversation, this boundary, this prayer, and therefore real. And if you ask, what happens if I fail again tomorrow? The Spirit answers, then you will practice resurrection, not as an excuse to fall, but as a certainty that falling is not the end. You will learn to confess quickly, repair promptly, re-enter wholeheartedly. You will learn the agility of the forgiven, the capacity to turn around in minutes rather than months. The flesh loves to convert a stumble into a spiral, to turn a mistake into an identity. The Spirit cuts the spiral with a single, stubborn truth. You are not what you did at your worst. You are who you are becoming in the hands of God. When this truth sinks in, the war does not disappear, but your posture changes. You fight no longer as a beggar trying to earn a place at the table, but as a son or daughter defending the home that has already been given to you. So begin here. Say the true names out loud. Call compromise what it is. Call avoidance what it is. Call the Spirit's guidance what it is. Not idealism, not extremism, but love's demand for your wholeness. Make your room an armory of small practices that tip your day toward God. A psalm before a screen, a whispered prayer before a difficult meeting, a chosen silence rather than a needless argument, a nightly exam instead of anxious replay. Gather your allies. Remove your triggers. Tell the truth sooner, and expect resistance, not because you are failing, but because the enemy never surrenders territory without a fight. The war for your soul is not a catastrophe. It is evidence that you are too important to be left alone by either kingdom. When the Spirit leads and the flesh resists, choose again to be led. That choice, repeated in obscurity, will become the most luminous thing about you. If this chapter served you, stay with me on this journey. New teachings like this arrive regularly, designed to strengthen and steady you in the real battles you face. Subscribe to the channel so you never miss the next step forward, training your desires until they can carry holiness. Without breaking, desire is not your enemy. Disordered desire is. The flesh persuades you that the safest way to live is to numb your longings so they cannot betray you. But numbness is simply hunger in a quieter room. The Spirit does not anesthetize desire. He reorders it until the very currents that once dragged you away begin to move you toward God. This is the long craft of holiness, not merely avoiding what ruins you, but wanting what heals you with such steadiness that obedience becomes natural and joy becomes durable. To reach this place, you will have to train like a musician, an athlete, a craftsman, people who know that skill is not born from occasional intensity, but from daily fidelity. Your soul is malleable clay, shaped by repeated pressures. If you change the pressures, you change the vessel. The training begins with attention, because desire follows attention, like a vine follows light. Whatever captures your gaze will, in time, capture your heart. If your morning and evening belong to glowing rectangles, your imagination will speak in the language of appetite and envy. If your morning and evening belong to prayer and scripture, your imagination will begin to speak in the cadences of hope and promise. Attention is not neutral, it is liturgy. When you make a small rule, no phone before prayer, no screen in the last 30 minutes of the day, you are not being quaint. You are rerouting the riverbeds of your mind so the water flows through gardens rather than gutters. The flesh will call you legalistic when you set these boundaries, but legalism is when rules replace love. Training is when rules protect love so that love can flourish. You are not building a cage, you are building a greenhouse. Desire must also be taught to wait without withering. The flesh is allergic to delay. It wants comfort now, vindication now, intimacy now, results now. When it does not receive them, it declares the path invalid. The Spirit tutors you in the art of holy deferral, not as punishment, but as preparation. Waiting stretches the soul so it can hold a larger blessing without bursting. Plants grown too quickly under artificial light look strong until the wind rises. Then they snap because their fibers never learn to flex. In the same way, unanswered prayers and slow victories teach you to bend without breaking. They harden your hope into something more than mood. They purify your motives. Are you obeying because God is God, or because obedience seems to work? They expose whether you treat God as a vendor or a father. In waiting, you learn to keep showing up when there is nothing to show off. You discover that faithfulness in obscurity is not a detour but a doorway. Humility and perseverance, learned in private, become authority and tenderness in public. Each time you stay at your post, praying when you feel nothing, serving when no one notices, telling the truth when it costs you, your desires are being rewired to prefer the giver over the gift. But desires will not be trained by negation alone. They need a higher pleasure that makes lower ones lose their glare. Temptation wins when your joy is fragile. The Spirit therefore invites you to feast on beauties that do not backfire. Wonder at creation, generous friendships, honest work done as worship, the relief of confession, the quiet dignity of keeping your word, the dignity of the poor who teach you what treasure really is. Gratitude is not a hallmark sentiment, it is a weapon that disarms envy and gluttony. When you name the gifts that already saturate your life, the breath in your lungs, the mercy in your past, the guidance that arrived just in time, you puncture the illusion that you are starved. Starvation narratives fuel compromise. People who believe they are deprived feel justified in taking what is not theirs. People who know they are cared for can endure the ache of not yet because they trust the heart that withholds. Gratitude keeps you from making idols out of good things and from making graves out of disappointments. It returns your desires to their proper sizes. Training desire also requires you to confront the stories beneath your cravings. Every compulsion carries a narrative. If I am desired, I am safe. If I am admired, I am real. If I control this outcome, I will finally rest. These sentences were not born yesterday. They are old survival strategies, adopted when you felt small, scared, unseen. The flesh tries to heal those wounds with anesthesia. The Spirit heals them with truth and presence. He will not only ask what you are reaching for, but why, what fear you are trying to quiet, what loneliness you are trying to drown, what shame you are trying to cover. If you do not meet these subterranean motives with God, they will continue to commandeer your appetites. So you bring them into prayer without polish. Father, I want to be noticed because I feel invisible. I want control because I am terrified of being hurt again. I want escape because I do not trust you to meet me in this room. Such prayers do not repel God. They are the doorway through which He enters. In the light, distorted desires lose their hypnotic power. In communion, the heart tastes a sweetness that counterfeits cannot sustain. And as intimacy grows, the old bargain, pleasure now, regret later, stops looking like a bargain at all. Community accelerates this reformation of desire. Alone, you will rationalize. With the wise, you will recognize. Alone, you repeat the loop. With the wise, you interrupt it. Find at least two people who love you enough to ask hard questions and gentle enough to carry your answers. Agree on practices that keep desire in the light. Weekly exam together, specific questions about your patterns, immediate confession when you sense the spiral beginning, not after it has finished. The flesh tells you that secrecy protects you from judgment. In reality, secrecy only protects your sin from healing. Light will sting at first, and then it will soothe. There will be weeks when you confess the same failure. Do not let despair turn you into a liar. Repetition is not proof that grace has failed. It is proof that your roots are deeper than your impatience. Saplings of new desire tremble in early winds. Keep tending them. In time, the winds that used to uproot you will simply comb your leaves. Training desire must also reach your body, because the flesh is not an abstract metaphor. It is a network of neural grooves and muscular memories that have learned to move towards certain pleasures. Fasting is therefore not a medieval relic. It is a rebellion against the tyranny of immediate appetite. When you lay down food, entertainment, or any harmless comfort for a time, you are not proving something to God. You are disproving a lie to yourself. I cannot be okay without this. Each fast breaks a little strand in that lie's rope. Likewise, discipline of sleep, movement, and work rhythms is not vanity, but stewardship. Exhausted people are easier to tempt. Rested people are harder to fool. Bodily care is spiritual warfare because despair and desire are embodied experiences. Treat your nervous system as part of your discipleship. Breathe slowly in conflict. Take a walk when anger surges. Drink water before you argue online. Pause long enough to feel the Spirit's nudge before you send the text you will regret. These are small hinges that swing large doors. The imagination can be baptized too. The flesh uses fantasy to rehearse sin. The Spirit uses imagination to rehearse obedience. Before the meeting where you are tempted to flatter, picture yourself telling the unembellished truth and surviving the awkwardness. Before the evening when lust usually stalks you, picture the moment you close the laptop, step outside, call a friend, pray a psalm, sleep clean. Before the family conversation that usually devolves into sarcasm, picture yourself blessing, listening, refusing the cheap laugh that costs someone else their dignity. The brain is shaped by rehearsal. If you can feel the texture of faithfulness in advance, you will be more likely to reach for it in the moment. This is not positive thinking. It is training your desires to recognize the taste of the future you are asking God to give you. Your desires will be contested territory. Some days they will surge toward good as easily as breath. Other days you will feel like you are dragging them uphill in the rain. On those days, remember that God counts direction, not drama. He honors the small yes said through gritted teeth more than the loud vow shouted on a stage. If all you can do is say, "God, I want to want what you want," then say it. If all you can do is not quit, then do not quit. The flesh insists that only spectacular victories count. The Spirit builds your life from 1,000 modest fidelities. Over time, your palate will change. The music you once loved will sound thin. The jokes you once told will taste bitter. The search history that once hummed with secrecy will become a testimony in your own memory that God really does make all things new. And when you fail, and you will, repent quickly, repair whatever you can, and refuse to narrate your identity from your worst day. Heaven is not impressed by your spiral, it is invested in your return. Finally, remember that the Spirit is not merely coaching you from the sidelines. He indwells you. You are not straining to import holiness from the outside. You are cooperating with holiness already present within. This changes everything. Discipline becomes collaboration, not self-salvation. Prayer becomes alignment, not performance. Scripture becomes conversation, not quotation. Your body becomes a temple under renovation, not a cage to be despised. And desire, once the horse that dragged you from the path, becomes the horse that carries you home, bridled by love, strengthened by truth, eager for the voice of its rider. This is the miracle you are living toward, not a life without longing, but a life whose longings are so well aimed that temptation loses its leverage and peace stops being occasional. It will not happen in a weekend. It will not happen without resistance. But it will happen because God is more relentless than your habits and more patient than your failures. Keep showing up. Keep telling the truth. Keep practicing the small beauties. Keep submitting your hands and your hours to the one who can make even your hungers holy. If this teaching is helping you reorient your desires and fight well, stay close. We're building a community around these deep practices and real victories. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next steps, and share this message with someone who needs strength for the same battle. Resistance often disguises itself as prudence, and the flesh loves to borrow the language of wisdom at precisely the moment when obedience is most costly. You will feel this most acutely in the small crossroads no one else will witness. The text you know you should send to apologize before night falls. The money you sense you should give before you rationalize a better use. The boundary you must state kindly, even though it may complicate a comfortable relationship. The browser tab you must close in the first 3 seconds, because by the 4th you will pretend you can handle it. The prayer you must speak out loud when silence would make your unbelief easier to hide. The Spirit's leadership is rarely theatrical. It is plain, clean, and immediate. It comes as a nudge rather than a negotiation, a clarity rather than a calculation, a simple yes that asks to be honored before your mood convenes its committee. If you hesitate long enough, the flesh will furnish a dozen exhibits for why obedience is unwise today. It will point to your fatigue, your schedule, the risks to your reputation, the likelihood of misunderstanding, the possibility that you'll look naive. But beneath these exhibits sits the same old fear. If you trust God here, who will take care of you? The Spirit answers that question not with promises of ease, but with reminders of faithfulness. How often He has met you in places you dreaded, how often the hard choice later proved to be the gentle one. The flesh says, protect yourself. The Spirit says, entrust yourself. The difference is the distance between a life that is safe and small and a life that is hidden in God. To move with the Spirit in such moments, you will need to shrink the gap between conviction and action. Most defeats occur in that gap. Most freedom is born by closing it. Practice choosing the good while it is still small enough to lift. When the thought arrives, do this. Do not build a case. Build emotion. Walk to the sink and wash the dish as prayer. Pick up the phone and reconcile as worship. Turn your chair toward your child and listen as if tomorrow depends on it, because it probably does. Holiness hardens into habit when you continually answer God before you amplify yourself. This is not impulsiveness. It is trained responsiveness. Picture a musician who can hear a key change and move with it without the clatter of finding notes. That is what the Spirit is shaping in you, a soul that can pivot from self to God in a single breath, because the muscles of obedience have been strengthened through 1,000 repetitions. If you ask how to start, begin with the rule of quick consent. When God makes the right path plain, I will take the first step within 1 minute. Do not police outcomes. Do not demand assurances. Treat the first step as your whole assignment and let the next step be revealed only as needed. Faith is not a map. It is a lamp for the next pace. This speed of consent requires the right conditions in the interior life. You cannot sprint toward God from a couch of cynicism. You cannot hear a whisper in a room filled with your own commentary. The flesh is verbose, the spirit is succinct. Therefore cultivate intervals of quiet that reset your hearing. Several times a day, give God one undistracted minute. Close your eyes, breathe deeply, release the grip of your plans and pray, "Lead, and I will follow." Do this at thresholds, before you open your email, before you respond to a hard message, before a meeting, after a meeting, before you enter your home. Threshold prayers install hinges on your hours so that doors can open toward God. Over time, they recalibrate your nervous system to look for the Spirit's cues instead of your triggers. You will notice that anxiety no longer rushes to fill every empty space. Peace arrives first and asks if it may stay. The flesh will contest this peace with what it knows best, noise and urgency. It will suggest that important people don't move at the pace of prayer, that decisive leaders don't pause to ask for counsel, that winners are the ones who act faster than everyone else. Do not believe it. Rashness is not authority, it is insecurity in a hurry. The authority of Christ, unhurried, unflappable, attentive, flows through people who refuse to be dragged by the fears of the moment. They carry a deep interior Sabbath that is not the absence of labor, but the absence of striving. When you learn to work from rest, you stop making frantic choices that the next week must heal. Your yes grows fewer and stronger. Your no grows kinder and clearer. You live in such a way that the Spirit can steer you mid-course because you have left margin for guidance to matter. Another face of resistance is the self-accusing voice that arises after you obey. It whispers that you were foolish, that you misheard, that you overreacted, that you made things worse. Sometimes that voice is your old perfectionism throwing a tantrum because you did not consult it. Sometimes it is the disappointed echo of someone else's expectations. Sometimes it is the enemy who knows he cannot keep you from obedience, and so he tries to sour it. Learn to meet that voice with testimony. I did the next right thing I knew before God, and my Father is pleased. If you discover later that you were partly wrong, do not collapse into shame. Adjust and keep moving. God trains sailors, not statues. The Spirit does not demand that you steer flawlessly. He teaches you to correct quickly. You will miss a turn. You will speak too soon or too late. You will help when you should have waited or wait when you should have helped. But if you keep your hand in His, even your zigzags will trace a line of wisdom. In time, you will learn to distinguish the clean sting of conviction from the dirty weight of condemnation. Conviction arrives with a path forward. Condemnation arrives with a wall. Follow the voice that points toward the next faithful step, and refuse the one that points only to your past. To persevere beyond a few brave days, you must convert obedience from an episode into an ecosystem. An ecosystem is made of practices, places, and people that all preach the same sermon to your nervous system. God can be trusted here. Begin with practices that are small enough to keep and strategic enough to change you. Rise at a set hour and give God the first sentence of your day. Father, I am yours. Read a psalm aloud and let its language baptize your mouth before the world recruits it. Set 3 alarms, morning, noon, and evening, that chime a single question. Where am I resisting the Spirit right now? Do not answer abstractly. Write down the name, the behavior, the conversation. Then choose one micro-act that contradicts that resistance. Send the encouragement you have delayed. Delete the file that belongs to a former life, step outside and thank God for one plain beauty that your worry has hidden. At night, practice a simple exam. Where did I sense God and move with Him? Where did I sense Him and withhold? Confess with concreteness. Receive forgiveness with the same concreteness. Ask for tomorrow's grace with the same specificity. Repetition is how the Spirit braids holiness into your reflexes. Places matter because the body keeps score. Your environment is a participant in your sanctification. There are rooms where you often fall and rooms where you often recover. Bless and protect the latter. Alter and flee the former. Rearrange a corner of your home into a chapel, a chair that you use only for prayer, a Bible that lives there, a small notebook and pen, a candle you light as a marker that this time is different from the rest of your day. Teach your senses to associate that corner with presence. Then do the same at your workplace. 5 minutes on a bench under a tree, or a quiet stairwell, or an empty conference room at lunch. Mark it with the sentence you always pray there. These altars of habit become landing pads for grace in the weather of your week. You will find, after months, that simply sitting in those places adjusts your breathing and clarifies your choices. People complete the ecosystem. Without comrades, the inner war becomes melodrama. With comrades, the same war becomes pilgrimage. Find intercessors rather than commentators, men and women who will pray you forward instead of advising you into circles. Create a rhythm that does not depend on crisis. Meet every week for 90 minutes around a table or a living room floor. Read something sturdy together that makes compromise feel shabby. Share one victory and one resistance. Lay hands on one another and ask the Spirit for fresh power, not as a show, but as a normal exchange of love. Send a midweek message that is only scripture, not analysis. Celebrate anniversaries of obedience the way others celebrate promotions. A year since I left that secret behind. 6 months since we named the problem and began the new path. Remember and rehearse such milestones until your community's memory becomes scaffolding for souls that are learning to stand. Inevitably, suffering will arrive to test whether your obedience rests on circumstances or on communion. Pain exposes what your peace has been resting on. If your peace rests on control, pain will feel like theft. If your peace rests on Christ, pain will feel like participation. The flesh interprets hardship as evidence that God has left the room. The Spirit interprets hardship as an invitation to a deeper room, one where consolation is thicker and courage is born. Do not glamorize suffering. Do not flee it either. Hold it before the Father and ask Him to attach it to redemption. This means very concrete things. Keeping your appointments with prayer when grief makes them feel pointless. Asking for help before despair isolates you. Continuing generosity when scarcity screams. Blessing enemies when retaliation offers its sugar. In such acts, the war does not end, but it is decisively tilted. The enemy cannot comprehend a person who praises with tears in their eyes. Such a person is already weaponized by hope. You will also face seasons when God seems to say little. The silence will tempt you to invent guidance to avoid the vulnerability of waiting. Resist that temptation. Return to the last clear instruction and keep it until a new one is given. Often the question is not, "What should I do?" but will I continue to do the simple thing I already know while it looks small? The flesh is addicted to novelty. The Spirit forms saints through fidelity. Keep sowing the seed you were given, the phone call, the hidden service, the disciplined craft, the daily scripture, the guarding of your tongue, the weekly table with friends, the purity in private. Farmers do not accuse the field for not bearing fruit in winter. They tend it so that spring will not find them unprepared. Do likewise with your soul. Trust the calendar of God. Stop forcing harvest in January by exhausting the soil. Let courage be defined not by how loud you are, but by how clean you are. Clean hands can lift heavy things. Clean motives can make hard statements without poison. Clean habits can carry callings that would crush a double life. Aim for that kind of strength. It will not make you famous, but it will make you free. And freedom is contagious. Your integrity will license others to tell the truth. Your quiet courage will make someone else set down what is killing them. Your refusal to entertain gossip will starve a slander that has lived too long in your circle. Your forgiveness will end a feud that your grandchildren would have otherwise inherited. This is how the Spirit wins wars, not always by fire from heaven, but by clean water, filling 100 ordinary cups every day until whole cities thirst for it. Keep going. Keep making the next brave, small choice. Keep clearing the path between conviction and action. Keep honoring the thresholds with prayer. Keep your altars intact. Keep your companions close. Keep your story honest. You will wake one morning to discover that what once took all your strength now takes only your consent, and then you will know that grace has seeped into your sinews. You will walk in rooms you used to avoid and bring peace with you. You will notice the old temptations and feel the thrill of indifference. You will recognize the devices of the enemy and feel almost tender toward your former self, the one who could not yet see what you now see. And when a new battle arises, as it will face it without drama, neither surprised nor afraid, because you have learned that the Spirit's leadership is the safest place in any storm, and the flesh's promises are always smaller than the person God is making of you. If this part strengthened you to obey faster and trust deeper, stay with us. We're building these muscles together, one faithful step at a time. Subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next teaching, and share this message with someone who needs courage for their own next step. Failure is not an interruption to the spiritual life. It is part of the terrain in which the spiritual life is actually learned. The flesh tells you that failure proves you do not belong in holy places, that you must sit in the back row of your own soul with your head down until you have accumulated enough spotless days to re-enter the conversation. But the Spirit insists that failure, brought honestly into the light, becomes the raw material of intimacy, wisdom and tenderness. What you do in the first 20 minutes after you fall will shape the next 20 days. The flesh wants those minutes. It urges delay. Process this later, because delay curdles conviction into condemnation. It urges spectacle. Promise something grand, because vows distract from repentance. It urges isolation. Handle this alone, because secrecy is fertilizer for shame. The Spirit's path is quieter and nearer. Come now, tell the truth. Receive what you cannot purchase, repair what you can, and get back into pilgrimage at once. Holiness is not a museum of unbroken statues. It is a hospital of resurrected people who learn to be carried before they learn to walk again. You will have to relearn confession as a place of encounter rather than an exam you perpetually fail. To confess Christianly is not to rehearse your worst with theatrical self-disgust. It is to agree with God about reality and to accept His verdict over your feelings. You say the real words, no euphemisms, no passive voice, no mistakes were made. And you place those words into scarred hands that have already paid for them. The cross is the only courtroom where the judge has become your defense, the only hospital where the physician has already absorbed the disease. This is why confession frees rather than flattens. You are not presenting evidence to a hostile flaw. You are handing burdens to someone stronger who wants them. If you do not experience relief when you confess, you have stopped too soon. Stay until the sentence in your mouth matches the sentence in His. Forgiven, now learn. That now learn matters. Cheap grace tells you that forgiveness ends the conversation. Real grace tells you forgiveness begins discipleship. It does not erase consequence, but it converts consequence into curriculum. The very edges you cut into your life become the contours along which God carves new integrity. Repair is the next holy verb. The flesh wants private absolution that costs no pride. The Spirit wants reconciliation that costs whatever pride remains, because pride is the one luxury your soul cannot afford. Where your words bent trust, straighten them. Where your absence created weight others had to carry, show up and carry. Where your secrecy turned honest people into unknowing accomplices, tell the truth and release them. Do not dramatize. Do not delay. Apologies should be short, specific, and self-indicting, not negotiating. Replace if with I. Replace sorry you felt with I chose. Replace but with silence. Offer restitution where appropriate, and then refuse the temptation to supervise the outcome. Some will forgive quickly, some will need time, some will not trust you yet. Your assignment is obedience, not outcome. If you remain steady, time will put a halo on your amends. The same people who doubted will one day tell your story to others as proof that people really can change. You must also learn to separate grief from self-hatred. Grief is clean. It admits the wrong, mourns the harm, and lets sorrow move you to better living. Self-hatred is mold. It thrives in dark corners and distorts the image of God until you cannot recognize yourself as beloved. The flesh claims self-contempt is humility. It is not. Humility tells the truth about your limits and failures while standing under the waterfall of God's affection. Self-contempt tells the truth without the water and calls the dryness realism. The cure is worship, not willpower. Fix your attention on the one whose mixture of holiness and mercy unmakes your categories. Sing even when your voice is cracked. Read the Psalms until one of them starts breathing in your chest. Lift your hands when you feel least worthy, and let your body teach your mind what your mind has forgotten. You approach by blood, not by performance. In worship, shame loses its oxygen because worship decenter you from you. When failure visits repeatedly in the same place, the flesh insists the story is fixed. This is who you are. The Spirit answers with a slower sentence. This is where grace intends to be obvious. Patterns of sin are not merely stubborn, they are instructional. They indicate unhealed pain, untrained desire, unguarded thresholds, or unexamined agreements you made with yourself in lonely rooms. Do forensic work with God. Trace the path 10 minutes before you usually fall. Notice the thoughts you always think, the time of day, the doorway you always walk through, the feeling in your chest, the lie that always sells. Write it down. Interrupt the earliest link in the chain, not the last. The first holy decision is often logistical, not dramatic. Move the charger out of your bedroom. Never keep your laptop on the couch after a certain hour. Delete the thread that has become a shrine to resentment. Put your running shoes by the door the night before. Decide in daylight what you will do in the dark. Ask 2 trusted friends to stand at those thresholds with you. A call, a check-in, a send me a photo of the closed laptop, a text me after the conversation you fear. People talk about accountability as if it were punitive. In health, it is collaborative joy, others lending you their steadiness until yours grows. Turn relapse into rehearsal for resurrection. The flesh wants you to narrate a stumble as a future, the spirit wants you to narrate it as a data point. After each fall, conduct a gentle after-action review with God and your allies. What signals did I ignore? What provision did I neglect? Where did I tell myself a half-true story to look away from the whole truth? Then write a 1-sentence adjustment and practice it tomorrow. This keeps failure from metastasizing into fatalism. Over months, the micro-corrections compound into tectonic shifts. You will notice you recover faster, you confess sooner, you endure temptation longer without bitterness, and you care more about the person you hurt than the image you must salvage. That last sign is crucial. Growth has landed when love displaces optics as your primary concern. Your body again is an ally here. Shame lives in the nervous system. Tight chest, shallow breath, tunnel vision, shaking hands. The Spirit leads you to shepherd your physiology as an act of faith rather than to be dragged by it as fate. When you feel the shame surge, pause and breathe long enough for your prefrontal clarity to return. Place a hand on your chest and pray out loud the truest thing you know. Father, I belong to you. Get into light or water, step outside. Look at something far away so your vision widens again. Splash water on your face to signal to your animal brain that you are not in mortal danger. These are not tricks, they are acts of stewardship, acknowledging that your soul lives in a body that needed kindness long before it needed critique. In this regulated space, you can choose the next faithful act rather than reenact the old panic. Suffering intertwined with failure, consequences you cannot reverse, relationships you cannot repair on your timetable, will tempt you to nihilism or to religiosity. Nihilism says nothing matters. Religiosity says only perfect success matters. Both are lies that excuse you from love. Love says something matters, this person before you, this prayer that costs you, this boundary that heals you, this generosity that defies your scarcity. It says, the perfect has already been offered, now bring your faithful. When consequences remain, let them disciple you without defining you. Receive them as tutors in patience, as guardrails against presumption, as memorials that keep you tender toward others' messes. Those who integrate consequence without self-contempt become safe places for sinners who want to be saints. They carry a compassion that does not minimize sin and does not maximize distance. They have the rare authority to say, I know the way back, because they have walked it not once, but many times. One of the fiercest temptations after failure is to overcorrect into a life too tight to be human. A desert of never again, where joy is suspect and spontaneity is sinful. Resist that counterfeit. The Spirit leads you into sturdiness that can carry joy without breaking. It is good to laugh, to feast, to rest with friends, to savor beauty, to celebrate small deliverances as if they were previews of the kingdom, because they are. Joy is not a reward you receive after you succeed. It is strength by which you succeed. People who have tasted holy gladness can look temptation in the eye and say, you cannot afford me, because their palate has changed. Practice joy on purpose. Mark the day you confessed and came clean as an anniversary worth honoring. Gather your people when you hit a humble milestone. Write down mercies as if they were treasures, because they are. Joy braided with gratitude makes relapse less attractive and recovery more sustainable. Learn to pray from the middle of your story, not only from the start or the end. A lot of people postpone prayer until they feel clean, then wonder why they rarely pray. Bring God the half-finished sentences, the fresh mess, the trembling hands. Tell him where you do not yet want what he wants, and ask him to want it in you. This is consent at the molecular level of the soul. It is where the deepest transformations happen, quietly and inexorably. Over time, you will notice that the things you used to beg to be taken away become the places you now invite him to dwell. The thorn does not get the last word, presence does, and presence is enough. Finally, turn your failures into intercession for others. The wound where you have bled becomes the place you will bandage others most gently. Every time you lift someone else's name where your own used to lie, the enemy loses a little more jurisdiction over that ground. Pray specific deliverance over what once owned you. Bless in detail. God, give her the quick confession I once delayed. Give him the friend I refused. Interrupt at the exact minute where I used to fall. In this way, your history is not a chain on your ankle, but seed in your hand. You become dangerous to darkness, precisely because you know its angles, and because you no longer fear the light that exposes them. If failure has been the echo in your day, let grace become the voice. Do the next clean thing. Ask for help sooner than feels dignified. Repair what you can without bargaining for how you will be seen. Worship until your posture remembers the gospel your mind questions. Install small boundaries where your big speeches used to stand. Keep a record of mercies and a short account of wrongs. Bless others out of the place that used to break you. Then rest, not as escape, but as agreement with a larger truth. You are being kept by a love older than your worst day and stronger than your most practiced sin. This is how intimacy grows in the very soil where shame once spread. This is how the war for your soul starts to look, from the enemy's perspective, increasingly unwinnable. If this message met you in a place you needed strength, stay close. We are walking this road together, with real practices and real hope. Subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next teachings, and share this with someone who needs a hand up from the same battlefield. Endurance is the art of turning revelation into a rule of life, of letting what you have seen in flashes become how you walk on ordinary streets. Early zeal will give you 100 starts, only endurance will give you a finish. The flesh can imitate beginnings, grand vows, fresh notebooks, dramatic fasts, but it grows impatient when the path refuses to be spectacular. The Spirit forms saints in seasons where there is nothing to photograph, the same prayers repeated on the same chair, the same refusals voiced to the same temptations, the same kindness offered to the same difficult person. Endurance is the choice to keep company with God without needing constant novelty to justify your loyalty. It is the slow, luminous stubbornness to stay at your post because love asked you to, and love is reason enough. If you would win the long war for your soul, learn to treat boredom as a bell calling you back to love, not as a signal to look for a different life. Boredom means the thrill has faded. It does not mean the truth has. Stand still where God placed you until the ground under your feet becomes holy again. Endurance is not gritting your teeth until the storm passes. It is learning the weather of the kingdom so you can live in any climate. Sometimes the wind will be at your back, and obedience will feel effortless. Sometimes it will be in your face and everything will cost you twice. Sometimes the air will be eerily still, and you will mistake the quiet for abandonment, when in truth you are being trained to move by compass rather than by wind. The flesh makes peace a function of conditions. The Spirit makes peace the atmosphere you carry into conditions. You cultivate this by refusing to outsource your steadiness to your schedule, your audience, or your outcomes. You lace your day with anchors, scripture before screens, gratitude before grievances, confession before performance, prayer before reaction, so that when weather shifts, your soul does not. You keep Sabbath not as a luxury, but as rebellion. You cease from producing as if the world were your responsibility, and remember that you are a creature whose dignity begins in being, not in output. You keep watch at night when worry prowls, not to bargain with God for guarantees, but to hand him the hour your fears prefer, until your body knows that the darkest watch belongs to the Lord. Endurance requires a truthful relationship with time. The flesh lives either in nostalgia or in fantasy, editing the past until it becomes a shrine, or projecting the future until it becomes a drug. The Spirit keeps you present in the hour where obedience can actually occur. He teaches you to call things by their real names on their real day. Today is the only day you can forgive. Today is the only day you can flee. Today is the only day you can bless. Today is the only day you can choose. The great lies of the flesh are calendared lies. Tomorrow I will be consistent. Tomorrow I will be brave. And they feel pious because they affirm the good while keeping it safely out of reach. Endurance drags holiness out of tomorrow and nails it to now. It does so gently, with small promises made to God and kept, one by one, until trust forms a path across years. Do not swear lifetime vows you cannot imagine keeping. Offer daily fidelity you can actually live. When tomorrow becomes today, repeat. 1,000 todays, well stewarded, become a life that quietly terrifies the enemy. Endurance also includes holy indifference to praise and censure. The flesh craves applause when you obey and sulks when you are misunderstood. The Spirit trains you to let affirmation warm you without steering you, and to let criticism inform you without shrinking you. You practice what Jesus did, not entrusting yourself to those who believe or those who oppose, but entrusting yourself to the one who judges justly. You thank the encouragers and keep walking. You hear the critics and keep walking. You stand in silence and keep walking. When you are tempted to curate appearances, to post a version of your holiness that plays well, remember that image management consumes the attention endurance needs. Live so that the secret history God keeps matters more to you than the public narrative others write. Keep your best obedience unphotographed. Hide some victories in God the way lovers keep inside jokes. Let your heart know it has treasures no one else can access. That secrecy will protect your sincerity when attention comes, and it will protect your courage when attention fades. There is a gentleness that endurance learns only by staying with people who are harder to love. The flesh defines maturity as distance from messy people. The Spirit defines maturity as capacity to remain with them without being swallowed. This does not mean tolerating abuse or ignoring wisdom. It means learning the strength to bless from a clean heart where manipulation once lived. Endurance in love looks like checking back after the drama ends, remembering birthdays, honoring boundaries you set without resentment, praying quietly for someone you cannot fix, listening to the person whose pace is slower than your patience. The war for your soul is won not only in your private disciplines, but also in the way you relentlessly treat people as image bearers, when convenience would reduce them to obstacles or tools. If you can carry love across months of inconvenience, you will discover that mercy is a muscle, and that God trusts muscles that have been warmed by long use with heavier assignments. Endurance is honest about weakness. It does not pretend that yesterday's strength guarantees today's victory. It keeps watch in places where triumph once tempted complacency. It remembers that the enemy often knocks at the same hour, on the same door, with the same tone. It leaves a note there for future you. When you feel this, do this. It stores simple instructions where panic once lived. Call Daniel, drink water, open the window, walk, Psalm 27 aloud, text for prayer, put the device in the drawer, say the whole truth. This is not immaturity. It is wisdom. Mature people keep their tools where they can reach them. Mature people refuse to be surprised by temptations that have RSVP'd for years. Mature people schedule joy on purpose so the heart does not forage in garbage for sugar. Endurance looks like a calendar that helps you be who you said you wanted to be on the day you felt clear. There is an eschatology to endurance, a way of seeing the finish line that changes how you run. The flesh wants trophies you can hold now. The Spirit puts in your hands a hope you cannot yet touch, but can already taste. You picture the feast where the poor sit in honored places and the proud are relieved to have their crowns melted into bells of laughter. You picture the faces you forgave, glowing with a light that does not humiliate you for having been slow to forgive. You picture the conversations where God reads back to you the prayers you do not remember praying and shows you who they became. You picture the moments you said no to secrecy being turned into windows through which others saw a way home. And you let this future talk to your present. Do not trade your inheritance for an appetite. Do not exchange a sentence from God for an opinion from the crowd. Do not sell your birthright of peace for a weekend of adrenaline. Endurance is the long refusal to be cheaply satisfied because you have set your appetite on a banquet that does not rot. To endure, cultivate holy curiosity about God in your ordinary life. Ask better questions than, how fast can I finish? Ask, what is God forming in me through this timing? Which fruit of the Spirit is being invited to ripen here? What new intercession is being born from this ache? How can I embody the sermon I am tempted to preach? Curiosity turns trials into classrooms and keeps cynicism from colonizing your mind. The cynical person thinks they are wise because they have stopped being surprised. They have only stopped paying attention. Endurance pays vivid attention until it can trace Grace's subtle handwriting across difficult pages. It collects stories of God's interventions, small, unspectacular rescues that, gathered over time, form a mosaic you can stand on when the ground shakes. Write them, tell them, let your memory become a sanctuary others enter when their vision is small. Guard your imagination, because endurance is either nourished or sabotaged by what you rehearse internally. If you nurse revenge fantasies, endurance rots into bitterness. If you rehearse your fears in high definition, endurance frays into avoidance. Instead, practice imagining the next faithful conversation going well enough, the hard meeting ending without poison, the long habit bending a little more under grace. Run mental footage of yourself obeying calmly and leaving outcomes in God's hands. This is not denial of reality, it is rehearsal of your vocation. Athletes visualize to strengthen neural pathways. Saints visualize to strengthen moral ones. What you repeatedly contemplate, you will find recognizably familiar when the hour arrives. Let obedience be familiar. At some point, endurance will ask you to carry a command you do not yet emotionally agree with. The flesh demands agreement before obedience and calls it integrity. The Spirit invites obedience before agreement and calls it trust. This is not an abdication of discernment. It is a recognition that God's wisdom outruns your moods and that your loves are still being healed. When your heart lags behind your yes, do not perform. Pray. Align my affections to my obedience. You will wake, sometimes suddenly, to find that the very boundary you resented has become the gate through which joy stays. That is the quiet miracle of endurance. It turns fences into vineyards. Endurance is not solitary even when it is lonely. You are surrounded by a great cloud of witnesses, men and women whose names you know and millions you never will, who kept faith when it looked foolish, who stayed married to their vows when romance went quiet, who kept generosity alive when budgets thinned, who raised their hands in worship when diagnoses mocked, who forgave enemies when their friends called it weak, who died without seeing in full what they had sown in part. Let them interrupt your self-pity. Let them remind you that obedience has always been costly and has always been worth it. Read biographies that make your excuses blush. Visit the elderly who can tell you what lasted. Ask for blessings from those who have walked longer. Take your place in a lineage that measures success by faithfulness, not by novelty. And when the end of a season comes, when God releases you from a work or reassigns you to another, let endurance express itself as clean exits. Leave places better than you found them. Return resources that are not yours. Bless leaders you could have resented. Thank critics you have learned from. Close accounts quickly. Do not scorch earth to justify your leaving. The way you finish one season is the seedbed of the next. Endurance does not merely cling, it also releases, trusting that the one who led you in will lead you out without wasting what was built in your bones. In the war for your soul, endurance is the quiet strategy that outlasts both temptation and discouragement. It is how courage becomes character, how moments of clarity become a manner of life, how 1,000 little deaths become a resurrection-shaped person. Keep the chair, and the psalm, and the confession, and the boundary, and the laugh, and the table, and the fast, and the feast. Keep the clean phone, and the honest text, and the timely apology, and the unposted good deed. Keep the Sabbath and the silence and the song you sing when you do not feel like singing. Keep the friends who tell you the truth and the memories of God's kindness, where you can reach them when the night is long. Keep going, not because the finish makes you worthy, but because the one who called you is. And when you finally see his face, you will recognize it. You have been learning its light by obedience all this time. If this word steadied your steps and gave you strength to keep walking in the Spirit when your flesh resists, stay with us. More teachings like this are coming to root courage in your daily life. Subscribe to the channel so you never miss the next message, and share this with someone who needs endurance for their own battle.